Virginia Adams clutched her 7-month-old son to her chest as the stagecoach rumbled into Deming, New Mexico territory, dust billowing behind them like ghosts of her past. It was 1883, and she'd traveled over 1,000 miles to escape a nightmare, only to face an uncertain future in a town where she knew no one. No one except the man she was about to marry, a stranger whose name she'd only learned 3 weeks ago. Deming Station, the driver called out, pulling the reins tight as the coach slowed to a halt. Virginia adjusted her son Samuel's blanket, kissing his forehead as he slept peacefully against her, unaware of how much his very existence had upended her life. Her gaze drifted to the simple gold band on her finger. Not yet a wedding ring, but a promise of what would come tomorrow. A marriage of convenience with a man named Preston Blackley, a cattle rancher who had advertised for a wife in a Denver newspaper. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Adams?" asked Mrs. Holbrook, the older woman who had accompanied her from Denver. "It's not too late to return east." Virginia shook her head firmly. "There's nothing for us back there except danger. Samuel's father." She couldn't finish the sentence. How could she explain that her son's father was a powerful man in Boston who had threatened to take her child away, or worse, when she refused his demand to give Samuel up for adoption, to hide his indiscretion? The coach door swung open, revealing the dusty main street of Deming. Virginia took a deep breath and stepped down, her eyes scanning the crowd for the man who had described himself as tall with a brown hat and mustache, a description that could match half the men in the territory. Then she saw him. Preston Blackley stood apart from the others, his tall frame straight as a pine. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes, a startling clear blue, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something compelling about his steady gaze. "Miss Adams?" he asked, approaching with measured steps, hat in hand. His voice was deeper than she'd imagined from his letters, with a gentle rasp that spoke of open skies and long, quiet days. "Mrs. Adams," she corrected softly. "And yes, that's me." His eyes dropped to the sleeping bundle in her arms, and something flickered across his face, not disappointment or judgment as she'd feared, but something softer, more complicated. "You didn't mention a child in your letters," he said quietly. Virginia's heart sank. This was the moment she'd dreaded. I should have. I understand if you wish to withdraw your offer." Preston studied her face, then the child, then back to her. The seconds stretched between them like years. "No," he finally said. "My offer stands, but I reckon we have more to discuss than we thought." He offered his arm. "My wagon's this way. Welcome to Deming, Mrs. Adams. Tomorrow, if you still wish it, you'll be Mrs. Blackley." Virginia shifted Samuel to her other arm and tentatively took Preston's elbow. His forearm was solid muscle beneath the rolled sleeve of his shirt. "Thank you, Mr. Blackley." "Preston," he corrected. "If we're to be married tomorrow, seems we should at least use our Christian names." "Preston," she repeated, testing the name on her lips. "And I'm Virginia." He nodded once, a small smile appearing beneath his mustache. "Virginia," he said, and somehow the way he said her name made it sound like a promise. The ride to Preston's ranch was mostly silent. Virginia watched the town of Deming fall away behind them, replaced by vast expanses of scrubby desert, and distant mountains turned purple in the late afternoon light. Samuel had awakened and was watching the passing landscape with wide, curious eyes. "Your boy," Preston finally said, breaking the silence. "What's his name?" "Samuel," Virginia answered. "He's 7 months old." Preston nodded. "Samuel's a good name. Biblical. Strong." He glanced at the child. "He seems a calm sort. Good-natured." "He is," Virginia agreed, surprised by his observation. "He rarely fusses unless he's hungry or tired." That'll serve him well out here, Preston said. This land doesn't much care for complainers. As the wagon rounded a bend, a ranch house came into view larger than Virginia had expected, with a wide porch and several outbuildings. A corral held a dozen or more horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing. This is it, Preston said. Crossed Arrow Ranch. It's not fancy, but it's solid. 500 acres, 200 head of cattle, and the best water rights in the county. Virginia took it all in. This would be her home now, her and Samuel's sanctuary. It's lovely, she said honestly. Preston's expression softened slightly. Been adding on to the house these past few years. There's a room ready for you, and the boy. And... He hesitated. I'll be taking the room off the kitchen until you decide otherwise. Virginia felt heat rise to her cheeks. They hadn't discussed this aspect of their arrangement in their letters. Thank you, she said quietly. That's considerate. That night, after Preston had shown her to a surprisingly comfortable bedroom with a smaller adjoining room he'd hastily cleared out for Samuel, Virginia sat on the edge of her bed, looking out the window at the star-filled sky. In Boston, the city lights had dimmed the stars, but here they blazed with fierce clarity. A soft knock came at her door. Virginia? It's Preston. She quickly checked that her dressing gown was properly closed. Come in. Preston opened the door but remained in the doorway, as if crossing the threshold would be a line he wasn't ready to cross. He had removed his hat, and his dark hair fell across his forehead, making him look younger. I wanted to make sure you had everything you need, he said, and to tell you that I've asked Pastor Mills to come by tomorrow at noon for the ceremony, if that suits you. Virginia nodded. Yes, that would be fine. Preston shifted his weight. I should tell you, I'm not much for talking. Never have been. But I'm a good listener, and I keep my word. He met her eyes directly. I don't know what trouble you're running from, Virginia, but you and your boy are safe here. That's my promise to you. Virginia felt tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said simply. You're brave enough to travel halfway across the country with a baby to marry a stranger. That tells me something about your character. His eyes moved to the crib where Samuel slept. And I know what it's like to need a fresh start. Virginia wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression told her it wasn't the time. Instead, she said, Thank you, Preston, for everything. He nodded once. Good night, Virginia. Sleep well. After he left, Virginia lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the junipers, the occasional call of a night bird. So different from Boston's clattering streetcars and foghorns. Eventually, she drifted into the deepest sleep she'd had in months, feeling for the first time since discovering her pregnancy that perhaps there was a path forward after all. The wedding ceremony the next day was brief and simple. Pastor Mills, a kind-faced man in his 60s, spoke of commitment and partnership rather than love, which Virginia appreciated. Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch brought a small cake, and Mr. Peterson served as witness alongside Preston's foreman, a weathered man named Hank, who'd worked the Crossed Arrow for 15 years. I promise to be a good husband to you, Virginia, Preston said when prompted, his voice steady and sure. And a good guardian to your boy. This I vow before God and these witnesses. Virginia's own vows were similar promises of respect, fidelity, and partnership. When Pastor Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Preston leaned down and placed the gentlest of kisses on her cheek. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackley, he murmured. The weeks that followed fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. Preston rose before dawn each day to work with the cattle and horses, often not returning until dusk. Virginia took over the household, cleaning and organizing the ranch house that had clearly been managed by a bachelor for too long. She planted a vegetable garden, learned to make sourdough from Mrs. Peterson, and found herself singing as she worked something she hadn't done since before Samuel was born. Preston was true to his word about being a man of few words, but Virginia soon learned to read his expressions and gestures, the way his eyes crinkled when he was pleased, how he always removed his boots and hat before entering the house, no matter how tired he was, the tender way he would look at Samuel when he thought Virginia wasn't watching. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Virginia found Preston sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the chair beside him, Samuel sleeping against her shoulder. "May I?" Preston asked, gesturing to the baby. Surprised, Virginia carefully transferred Samuel to Preston's arms. The cowboy held the child with unexpected confidence, cradling him against his broad chest. "You're good with him," Virginia observed. Preston's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Had 4 younger brothers and sisters. Ma needed the help. He looked down at Samuel's sleeping face. "He looks like you. Same chin. Same eyes." "He has his father's nose," Virginia said before she could stop herself. Preston was quiet for a long moment. "You never talk about him. Samuel's father?" Virginia stared out at the darkening landscape. "There's not much to tell. He is a married man, a prominent banker in Boston. When I told him I was expecting, he offered money for me to take care of the problem." Her voice hardened. "When I refused, he threatened to have me committed to an asylum and take the baby once it was born. Said no one would believe a housekeeper over him." Preston's hand tightened slightly on Samuel, but his voice remained calm. "That's why you came west." Virginia nodded. "I worked until I couldn't hide it anymore, saved every penny. After Samuel was born, I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone had left on the train. A rancher seeking a wife." She met his eyes. It seemed like Providence. Preston was silent, processing her story. Finally, he asked, "Are you afraid he'll find you?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "He has connections. But mostly, I'm afraid he'll stop looking. That he'll decide we're not worth the trouble. And then I'll have uprooted our lives and married a stranger for nothing." Preston studied her face in the fading light. "Not for nothing," he said quietly. Then, with a gentleness that made her heart ache, he added, "I'm glad you chose my advertisement, Virginia." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the coyotes calling in the distance, Virginia realized something startling. She was happy here. Happier than she'd been in years. The threat that had driven her west still existed, but it seemed less immediate, less terrifying. When viewed from the safety of Crossed Arrow Ranch and the protection of a man who, though still largely a mystery to her, had shown nothing but decency and respect. As summer turned to fall, Virginia found herself watching Preston more closely the way he handled the spirited horses with calm authority, how gentle his hands were when treating an injured calf, the rare but wonderful sound of his laughter when Hank told stories around the supper table. The physical distance between them began to close, incrementally. His hand would brush hers when passing the salt. She'd smooth his collar before Sunday services. And each night, his "Good night, Virginia" seemed to carry a question that neither of them was ready to voice. Then came the night of the first autumn storm. Thunder rattled the windows and Samuel woke screaming, terrified by the noise. Virginia lifted him from his crib, trying to soothe him, but the baby was inconsolable. The bedroom door opened, and Preston stood there in his union suit and suspenders, his hair tousled from sleep. "Everything all right?" Virginia bounced Samuel gently. "The storm frightened him. I can't seem to settle him." Preston hesitated, then said, "My mother used to sing to us during storms. Said it gave the thunder something to compete with." Virginia smiled despite her exhaustion. I've tried singing. He's not impressed with my talents. Maybe he needs a duet, Preston suggested. And to Virginia's astonishment, he began to sing a low, gentle rendition of Shenandoah that rumbled from his chest like distant thunder itself. After a moment of shock, Virginia joined in, her higher voice weaving around Preston's baritone. Samuel's cries gradually subsided as he listened to the blend of their voices. By the third verse, his eyelids were drooping. When the song ended, Samuel was asleep again, his little body heavy and warm against Virginia's chest. She looked up to find Preston watching them both, an expression on his face she couldn't quite define, wistful, tender, and something else that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she whispered. Preston nodded. "Anytime," he said, and she knew he meant it. As he turned to leave, Virginia found herself saying, "Preston, wait." He paused, looking back at her. "Would you—" She swallowed, gathering her courage. "Would you stay? Just for a while, in case he wakes again." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, hope perhaps. "If you're sure." "I am." He crossed to the rocking chair in the corner and sat, his large frame making the chair seem small. Virginia placed Samuel back in his crib and then, instead of returning to her bed, perched on the edge of the window seat near Preston. "You have a beautiful voice," she said softly. "Why haven't I heard you sing before?" Preston shrugged. "Haven't had much cause to sing in recent years." "And before that?" she prompted gently. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice low. "I was married before. Her name was Sarah. We had a son, James." Virginia's heart constricted. "What happened to them?" "Influenza," Preston said, the single word carrying a world of grief. 5 years ago. James was just 2. They both went within a week of each other." "Oh, Preston," Virginia whispered. "I'm so sorry." He looked down at his hands. "After they died, I threw myself into the ranch. Worked from sunup to sundown. Didn't want to think. Didn't want to feel." He glanced at Samuel's crib. "When I saw you step off that stagecoach with a baby in your arms, I nearly turned around and walked away." Virginia felt a pang of understanding. "Because it was too painful?" "Because it was too much like what I'd been praying for," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "A second chance." Outside, the storm was passing, the thunder now distant rumbles. In the relative quiet, Virginia could hear her own heartbeat, racing with a mixture of fear and hope. "Is that what we are?" she asked. "A second chance?" Preston met her eyes. "I'd like us to be," he said simply. Virginia rose from the window seat and stepped toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. Preston stood as well, and suddenly they were close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I didn't expect this," she confessed. "When I answered your advertisement, I was looking for safety. Not—" She trailed off, unsure how to name the feeling blooming between them. "Not feelings?" Preston finished for her. Virginia nodded. Preston reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered, warm against her cheek. "I wasn't looking for them either," he said. "But here they are." Virginia closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Here they are," she echoed. That night, Preston slept in the rocking chair, and Virginia in her bed. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The next evening, when Preston said goodnight at her door, Virginia took his hand and led him into the room they now shared. As autumn deepened into winter, their marriage transformed from an arrangement into a true partnership. Virginia discovered that Preston was a man of deep feelings, carefully contained. His love emerged in actions rather than words, the way he carved wooden toys for Samuel, how he read aloud from books by the fire on winter evenings, the tender way he held Virginia in the night. Samuel thrived under Preston's attentive care, pulling himself up on furniture and babbling his first attempts at words. Virginia watched with a bittersweet joy as her son reached for Preston when he entered a room, clearly identifying him as a father figure. "Pa, pa, pa," Samuel chanted one evening, bouncing in Preston's lap. Preston froze, his eyes flying to Virginia's face. "I didn't teach him that," he said quickly. Virginia smiled. "I know. He decided for himself." "Are you all right with it?" Preston asked cautiously. Virginia considered the question. "Yes," she finally said. "You're more of a father to him than James Hamilton will ever be." It was the first time she'd spoken Samuel's biological father's full name aloud since coming to New Mexico. Preston nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Hamilton. From Boston." "Preston," Virginia said, sensing his thoughts. "It's been months. He's made no attempt to find us. I think we're safe." Preston's expression remained troubled. "Men like that. They don't forget. They don't forgive." Virginia wanted to argue, but deep down, she feared he was right. James Hamilton was a proud, vengeful man who viewed the world as his to control. Would he truly let go so easily? Her fears were confirmed 3 weeks later, when Preston returned from town with a telegram in hand and a grim expression on his face. "There was a man asking questions at the general store," he said, without preamble. "Well-dressed Easterner, said he was looking for his sister and nephew who might have passed through." Virginia's blood ran cold. Did he give a name? Called himself James Harrison, but Mrs. Taylor said he had monogrammed cufflinks with different initials. Preston handed her the telegram. "I sent a wire to the sheriff in Boston, an old Army friend. This just came back." Virginia's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. "James Hamilton. Stop banker, stop left Boston. 2 weeks ago. Stop traveling west with private detective. Stop wife. Filed divorce proceedings, citing abandonment. Stop exercise. Caution. Stop. He's coming for Samuel," Virginia whispered, gripping the telegram so tightly it crumpled. "Just like he threatened." Preston's face hardened. "I won't let him take your boy, Virginia. I swear it." Virginia looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "Our boy?" she corrected. "Samuel is our boy now." Preston took her hands in his. "Yes. Ours." He squeezed gently. "We have some decisions to make, Virginia. We can pack up tonight and head further west. Or we can stay and fight." Virginia thought about running another uprooting, another uncertain future. Then she thought about the home they'd built together, the life they'd created. "This is our home," she said firmly. "I'm tired of running from him." Preston nodded, a glint of approval in his eyes. "Then we fight. But we do it smart." Over the next few days, they prepared. Preston sent telegrams to the territorial judge, providing documentation of their marriage and explaining the situation. Virginia wrote out a detailed account of Hamilton's threats and manipulation, which Preston had notarized in town. Preston also arranged for several of his most trusted ranch hands to take shifts watching the road to the property. Virginia sewed through the nights, making new clothes for Samuel and herself not out of vanity, but determination. When Hamilton came, he would not find the frightened, desperate woman who had fled Boston. He would find Virginia Blackley, wife of Preston Blackley, mistress of Crossed Arrow Ranch. Just 5 days after the telegram arrived, Hank rode in at a gallop around midday. "They're coming," he reported. 2 men in a hired wagon, about 30 minutes out. Preston nodded calmly. "Thank you, Hank. Tell the men to go about their business, but stay alert." He turned to Virginia, who stood in the doorway with Samuel on her hip. "Are you ready for this?" Virginia straightened her shoulders. "Yes." Preston crossed to her and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead, then on Samuel's. "Remember, no matter what he says, the law is on our side. You're my wife. Samuel is being raised as my son. In the eyes of God and the territory, we are a family. Virginia nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. We are a family, she repeated. When the wagon appeared on the horizon, Preston and Virginia were waiting on the porch. Samuel sat contentedly on Preston's knee, playing with a wooden horse his adoptive father had carved for him. Virginia wore her best dress, her hair neatly pinned, looking every inch the respectable rancher's wife. As the wagon drew closer, Virginia's heart hammered in her chest. James Hamilton sat beside the driver, a thin, sharp-faced man who was undoubtedly the private detective. Hamilton looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold way, impeccably dressed even for travel, his posture rigid with entitlement. The wagon stopped in the yard, and Hamilton surveyed the ranch with obvious disdain before his gaze landed on the porch. Virginia saw the moment he recognized her. His eyes narrowed and his mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, but looked more like a sneer. "Virginia," he called out, not bothering to dismount. "I've come for my son." Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Virginia drew a deep breath and replied clearly, "I don't know what you're talking about, sir. This is my husband, Preston Blackley, and our son, Samuel." Hamilton's face darkened. "This charade is beneath you. That child is mine, and I've come to claim him. I'm prepared to be generous financial compensation for your inconvenience." Preston stood, passing Samuel to Virginia. He stepped to the edge of the porch, his posture relaxed but alert. "Mr. Hamilton," he said, his voice carrying easily across the yard, "you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you turn around and head back to town." Hamilton finally dismounted, straightening his expensive jacket. "I don't know what lies she's told you, Cowboy, but that woman was my employee, and that child was conceived under my roof. By law, he is mine." "That's not how the law works here," Preston replied evenly. "Virginia is my lawfully wedded wife. Samuel bears my name. We have documentation from the territorial judge confirming our legal status as a family." The detective leaned over and murmured something to Hamilton, who scowled. "This matter would be better discussed in private," Hamilton said, changing tactics. "Perhaps the lady and I could speak alone?" "Anything you have to say to my wife can be said in front of me," Preston replied. Virginia stepped forward, still holding Samuel. "James, you made your choice months ago. You chose your reputation over your son. You threatened to have me committed rather than acknowledge him. You don't want him out of love, you want him out of pride." Hamilton's facade cracked slightly, anger bleeding through. "You had no right to take my blood and run, Virginia. No right to give my son to a cowhand." "And you had no right to threaten me," Virginia countered. "No right to try to force me to abandon my child. No right to make me fear for my safety and Samuel's." "I'll fight you in every court in this territory," Hamilton spat. "I have the resources. I have the connections. And we have the truth," Preston said calmly. "We also have these." He pulled several folded papers from his vest pocket. "Affidavits from the Sheriff of Boston County regarding your threats against Virginia. A letter from your wife's divorce attorney confirming her testimony about your indiscretions with the household staff. And a ruling from Judge Wallace of the New Mexico Territory recognizing our marriage and my legal status as Samuel's father." He handed the papers to Hamilton, who snatched them with trembling hands. As the banker scanned the documents, his face paled, then flushed with rage. "This is blackmail," he hissed. "This is justice," Preston corrected. "Now, I'll ask you one more time to leave my property. Next time, I won't ask so politely." As if on cue, several ranch hands appeared from various directions, casually going about their business but clearly within earshot. Hamilton looked around, assessing the situation. The detective murmured something else, and Hamilton's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "This isn't over," he said, but the declaration lacked conviction. It is over, Virginia said firmly. Go back to Boston, James. Rebuild your life. Let us live ours. For a moment, Hamilton's gaze fixed on Samuel, and something like genuine regret flickered across his face. Then the mask fell back into place. Without another word, he climbed back into the wagon. The detective flicked the reins, and they turned around, heading back toward town. Virginia didn't realize she was trembling until Preston's arm came around her shoulders, steady and strong. He's gone, Preston murmured, and he won't be back. How can you be sure? Virginia asked, watching the wagon grow smaller in the distance. Men like Hamilton care about appearances above all, Preston said. The scandal of a court case would ruin him more thoroughly than losing this battle. He'll go back east to lick his wounds and convince himself he's better off. Virginia leaned into her husband's embrace, relief washing over her in waves. Samuel squirmed between them, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded, reaching for Preston's hat. "Pa!" he said clearly, his first distinct word. Preston's face transformed, joy breaking through like sunrise. "That's right, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." Virginia watched as Preston took Samuel in his arms, lifting him high and spinning him around, the little boy's laughter ringing out across the yard. This man who had started as a stranger, a name on a marriage certificate, a promise of safety, had become so much more. He had become the center of their world, the foundation of their family. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Virginia found Preston on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. She sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you," she said simply. Preston turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "For what?" "For everything. For marrying a desperate woman with a baby. For becoming Samuel's father in every way that matters. For fighting for us today." Preston brought her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her palm. "I didn't just become Samuel's father, Virginia. I became yours too. Your protector. Your partner." He paused, then added softly, "Your love, I hope." Virginia's heart swelled. "My love," she confirmed, without question. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall and years began to pass, the story of how Virginia Adams had married Preston Blackley to keep her child safe became a part of family lore told and retold, gathering the patina of time and love. The arranged marriage that had begun as a harbor in a storm had blossomed into something neither could have imagined that day at the Deming stagecoach stop. Samuel grew tall and strong like his adoptive father, with Virginia's quick mind and kind heart. He was joined by siblings first Emma, born almost exactly 2 years after Virginia and Preston's wedding, then Robert 3 years later, and finally little Hope, who arrived as a surprise when Samuel was 10. Preston expanded the ranch, building a larger house to accommodate their growing family. Virginia established a small school on the property, teaching not only her own children, but those from neighboring ranches. The Crossed Arrow became known throughout the territory for its fine horses, prosperous cattle, and the family at its heart. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Virginia would find Preston on the porch, watching the stars just as he had that first summer. She would sit beside him, their hands finding each other as naturally as breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him once, on their 15th anniversary. "Answering the door that day to find a woman with another man's child?" Preston looked at her, the years having added silver to his temples but none of the hardness that life sometimes carved into men's faces. "Never," he said with absolute certainty. "That day changed everything. That day saved me." Virginia leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "It saved us both," she said. "It saved us all." In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. Inside the house, Their children slept safely, dreams full of tomorrow's possibilities. And on the porch, Virginia and Preston Blackley sat together in the perfect understanding that comes from a love built slowly, deliberately, one day at a time, a love that had begun as a practical arrangement and grown into the truest thing either had ever known.